Guys. So, if you remember last time we read about Nick, he was on his 18th minute of his speech about the dictionary. Let's find out what happens next. This is phase two. But the next time Nick looked up, he saw Mrs. Granger sneaking a look at her watch. 18 minutes gone. Maybe his idea was going to work. After all, time for phase two. Reaching into his bag, Nick pulled out the red dictionary he had brought from home, the one most of the kids had, the one Mrs. Granger said they should use. Nick said, "This is the dictionary that I use at home for my vocabulary work, and I opened it up last night to the very front, and right there I found out a lot about how the dictionary was made, right in this book. So I thought some of the ideas would be good as part of my report. It says here, Nicholas," Nick looked up. Mrs. Granger got off her tall stool, and her wooden legs made a screech on the linoleum. Linoleum. On the linoleum. Head snapped to attention, and the class was alert again. Mrs. Granger smiled, raised her eyebrows, and pointed at her watch. "Nicholas, I think the class should read that at home themselves. Now." John's hand was up in the air and Mrs. Granger's not. He said, "But I don't have that dictionary at home, Mrs. Granger. I have the blue one." And several other kids immediately said me too. Mrs. Granger tried not to show that she was annoyed. "Very well, Nick, but it shouldn't take too long. We have other things to do today. I want to point out is this word up here, linoleum. I had to decode or sound out, even as a teacher. So make sure you're taking times to sound out your words too." Nick kept his eyes open wide and nodded, adjusted his glasses on his nose, and began to read. Without question, this modern American dictionary is one of the most surprisingly complex and profound documents ever to be created, for it embodies unparalleled etymological detail, reflecting not only superb lexicographic scholarship, but also the dreams and speech and imaginative talents of millions of people over thousands of years. For every person who has ever spoken or written in English has had a hand in its making. It was a long article and the kids were bored to death, but no one looked bored at all. Every kid in the room knew now that the period was more than half over, and that Nick's report wasn't just a report. It was one of the greatest time wasters he had ever invented. Mrs. Granger knew it too. She had edged around from the back of the room to the side near the windows. Nick glanced up at her now, and then as he read, and each time Mrs. Granger's eyes clicked up to a new power level. After 8 minutes of Nick's best nonstop reading, her eyes were practically burning holes in the chalkboard behind him. There were only 10 minutes left in seventh period. When he took a breath to start a new paragraph, Mrs. Granger cut him off. "That's a fine place to stop, Nicholas. Class, let's all give him a round of applause for his report." The applause didn't last long. As Nick took his bag and notes and sat down, Mrs. Granger's eyes went back to almost normal, and she actually smiled at him. "Although your report was a little long," she paused to let that sink in, "it was quite a good one. And isn't it fascinating that English has more different words than any other language used anywhere in the world?" She pointed at her large dictionary. "That one book contains the definition of more than 450,000 words. Now, wasn't I right, Nicholas? All this will mean so much more since you learned about it on your own." Mrs. Granger was beaming at him. Nick sank lower in his chair. This was worse than writing the report, worse than standing up to give it. He was being treated like the teacher's pet. He had the feeling she was doing it on purpose. His reputation was in great danger. So he launched another question. He raised his hand, and he didn't even wait for Mrs. Granger to call on him. "Yeah, but I still don't really get the idea of why words all mean different things. Like, who says that dog, means the thing that goes woof and wags its tail? Who says so?" And Mrs. Granger took the bait. "Who says dog means dog? You do, Nicholas. You and I, and everyone in this class, and the school, and the town, and the state, and this country. We all agree. If we lived in France, we would all agree that the right word for the four-legged creature was a different word, chien. It sounds like chien, but it means that dog means dog means to you and me. And in Germany, they say Hund, and so on all around the globe. But if all of us in this room decided to call that creature something else, and if everyone else did too, then that's what it would be called. And one day it would be written in the dictionary that way. We decide what goes in that book. And she pointed at the giant dictionary, and she looked right at Nick and smiled again. Who says dog means dog? Then Mrs. Granger went on. But of course, that dictionary was worked on by hundreds of very smart people for many years. So as far as we are concerned, that dictionary is the law. Laws can change, of course, but only if they need to. There may be new words that need to be made, but the ones in that book have been put there for good reasons. Mrs. Granger took a look at the clock. 8 minutes left. Now then, for today, you were to have done the exercises beginning on page 12 in your Words Alive book. Please get out your papers. Sarah, will you read the first sentence, identify the mistake, and then tell us how you corrected it? Mrs. Granger jammed the whole day's work into the last 8 minutes. Blur of verbs and nouns and prepositions, and yes, there was another homework assignment. And Nick didn't try to sidetrack Mrs. G again. He had slowed her down a little. Had he stopped her? No way. She was unstoppable, at least for today. Chapter 6, The Big Idea. 3 things happened later that same afternoon. Nick and Janet Fisk had missed the bus because of a school newspaper meeting, so they walked home together. They were seeing who could walk along the curb without falling. It took a lot of concentration, and then Janet stepped off into the street. Nick said, "That's 3 points for me." But Janet said, "I didn't fall, I saw something. Look." She bent down and picked up a gold ballpoint pen, fancy kind. That was the first thing, Janet finding the pen. They got back on the curb, and Nick followed Janet, putting one foot carefully in front of the other on the narrow concrete curb. And while he stepped along, he thought back over the school day, especially about his report, and what Mrs. Granger had said about words at the end of the period finally sank in. That was the second thing, understanding what Mrs. Granger had said. She had said, "Who says dog means dog?" "You do, Nicholas." "You do, Nicholas," he repeated to himself. "I do," Nick thought, still putting one foot in front of the other, following Janet. What does that mean? And then Nick remembered something. When he was about 2 years old, his mom had bought him one of those unbreakable cassette players and a bunch of sing-along tapes. That's like a CD player. He had loved them, and he played them over and over and over. He would carry the tape and the player to his mother or his big brother or his father and bang them together and say, "Gawagala, gawagala, gawagala," until someone put the cassette in the machine and turned it on. And for 3 years, whenever he said gawagala, his family knew that he wanted to hear those pretty sounds made with voices and instruments. Then, when Nick went to preschool, he learned that if he wanted his teacher and other kids to understand him, he had to use the word music. But gawagala meant that nice sound to Nick because Nick said so. Who says gawagala means music? You do, Nicholas. "No fair!" yelled Janet. They were at the corner of their own street, and Nick had bumped into her, completely absorbed in his thoughts. Janet stumbled off the curb, and the gold pen in her hand clattered onto the street. "Sorry, I didn't mean to, honest," said Nick. "I just wasn't watching. Here." Nick stooped over and picked up the pen and held it out to her. "Here's your..." And that's when the third thing happened. Nick didn't say pen. Instead, he said, "Here's your frindle." Frindle? Jan took her pen and looked at him like he was nuts. She wrinkled her nose and said, "What's a frindle?" Nick grinned and said, "You'll find out. See you later." It was there at the corner of Spring Street and South Grand Avenue, 1 block from home on a September afternoon. That's when Nick got the big idea. The big idea. And by the time he had run down the street and up the steps and through the door and upstairs to his room, it wasn't just a big idea. It was a plan, a whole plan, begging for Nick to put into action. Action was Nick's middle name. The next day after school, the plan began. Nick walked into the penny pantry store and asked the lady behind the counter for a frindle. She squinted at him. A what? A frindle, please, a black one. And Nick smiled at her. She leaned over closer and aimed one ear at him. You want what? The penny pantry store is a store where you can get school supplies. A frindle! And this time, Nick pointed at the ballpoint pens behind her on the shelf. A black one, Pete, please. The lady handed Nick the pen. He handed her the 49 cents, said thank you, and left the store. 6 days later, Janet stood at the counter of the penny pantry. Same store, same lady. John had come in the day before, and Pete the day before that, and Chris the day before that, and Dave the day before that. Janet was the 5th kid that Nick had sent there to ask that woman for a frindle. And when she asked, the lady reached for the pens and said blue or black. Nick was standing one aisle away at the candy racks, and he was grinning. Frindle was a real word. It meant pen. Who says frindle means pen? You do, Nicholas. Half an hour later, a group of serious 5th graders had a meeting in Nick's playroom. It was John, Pete, Dave, Chris, and Janet. Add Nick, and that's 6 kids, 6 secret agents. They held up their right hands and read the oath Nick had written out loud. From this day on and forever, I will never use the word pen again. Instead, I will use the word frindle, and I will do everything possible so others will too. And all 6 of them signed the oath with Nick's frindle. The plan would work. Thanks, Miss Granger. Okay, we're going to stop there. Bye, guys.